Hi. Um, Nice to see you again. Before we begin talking about this, I wanted to thank you for your kind words and well wishes, and most of all for your understanding during this past week and a half, however long it's been. I really do appreciate it. You've been great, and I've very much enjoyed being able to at least occasionally look into the conversations that you've been having. So, for all of that, namaste. Anyway, what I want to talk about now and put out for you a little bit are some of the ways in which the divergences in thinking about the teachings of the Buddha and Buddhist philosophy in general proceeded. Once the Buddha died, one of the great problems was facing exactly how to interpret his works, especially given the fact that his last sermon was, "Don't believe anything I say on the basis of my authority. Go and discover it for yourselves. Use the powers of reasoning for yourselves. Find these things for yourselves and try to make sense out of it." Well, that's very sage advice, but it's also something that makes it exceedingly difficult. So what I want to do is say a little bit about how these variations and divergences took place. Now, some of this you probably know about already. You can see from the readings. You can look up on the internet, so the history of the Four Councils and the way in which the general contours of how Buddhism evolved historically. But that doesn't necessarily help us understand how you are to take these ideas and these readings. And so what I want to do is say a little bit about the first early branch of Buddhism, a branch called, well, generally it's called Hinayana Buddhism, which means the lesser wheel. There are, or were at one time, 18 different schools of Hinayana Buddhism, but they have all become extinct with the exception of one. And the one that continues to still exist, the one branch of Hinayana Buddhism that still exists, is a branch called Theravada Buddhism. This Buddhism still is practiced, this variety of Buddhism, this way of interpreting the Dharma and the Sangha, is practiced in Thailand, in Sri Lanka, in Burma. And even though it's not the main form of Buddhism, I would say only about 1 in 10 Buddhists alive today are Theravada Buddhists or Hinayana Buddhists. The influence of Theravada, because it was so early, is quite profound. It's a bit like the influence of the teachings of Orthodox Christianity, I suppose, within the Christian world. It's not the most prominent, but its age and its role in the formation of these things becomes very important. So, anyway, that's what I want to talk about a bit. And I suppose the way I'd like to talk about this, help you approach this, these first few readings, you can see it in the book. It has the teachings of the Theravada Buddhism, is by looking at five general questions and thinking about the way in which Theravada Buddhists would respond to these questions. And then what I'm going to do is take the other great branch, the Mahayana Buddhists, and try and give an interpretation of how they would respond to these five great questions. You should know, too, that when I say great questions, that might be a little bit big on my part. These questions are not famous questions. In fact, they're questions that I'm thinking of generally as a way of approaching these issues. They're a bit pedagogical. I'm doing them didactically for your so that you can use them to begin learning what you need to learn with it. But anyway, the questions that I want to ask within this are, first of all, what should I do? How should I act? How should I tread the path towards liberation within Theravada Buddhism? Second, to whom ought I to look for a role model? What's the ideal of the saint in Theravada Buddhism? Third, what am I? What is this self? And as we've seen, the question of self, it's a tricky question in Buddhism in general, maybe even more so in Theravada Buddhism, because there is no self, just as there is no thing. Fourth, how shall I think about the aims of life? What ought I to hope for? What ought I to aspire towards? And then fifth, finally, what can I say about reality? What does it mean to be real when there is no such thing as a thing? What can we talk about? So let me begin to address these questions. I suspect it probably won't be all in this one clip, but I'll get it in the next couple clips anyway. First, the path towards liberation. What should I do with my life? Well, all Buddhists have the idea of the Eightfold Path, but it's interpreting what exactly the Eightfold Path means and how to practice it that becomes a key here. And with Theravada Buddhism, really the interpretation for this comes out of emphasizing sort of two basic aspects within Pratityasamutpada, or Patityasamutpada, since they do it in Pali, this dependent arising. They'd focus on meditation and they'd focus on mindfulness. Now, I say these two different things, meditation and mindfulness, but it's probably worth pointing out that meditation and mindfulness are really two sides of the same coin here. Meditation, remember, is simply the exercise of stilling the grasping of the mind, of doing those things that slow down the process of thinking, of grasping, of being distracted. There will always be things that pass, that move, that change. But the fact that that occurs doesn't necessarily have to mean anything in itself. We can look at the thoughts, at the feelings, at the actions that pass by our mind and through our senses the way that we look at clouds passing across the sky. We don't have to grab them. We don't have to run away from them. We can simply let them pass and change and move the way the clouds move across the sky, simply being what they are, these ephemeral vapors that are being shifted by winds we can't see. Well, so it is with our thoughts and our senses, the things that seem to afflict us. Meditation helps us bring the activity of the mind so it can regard it properly, regard things as they are, as such. Right? So there's that. And mindfulness is cultivating an approach to situations that they will pass and they are merely thus. Right? I think you see a lot of this, especially in our readings in the Song of the Wayfarer, of this way in which one is trying to be truly present to a situation just as it is, realizing that when you're sensing something, seeing something, imagining something, it's just that. It's no more, it's no little. You neither need to grasp nor retreat from it. You don't need to change anything at all. All that needs to happen is simply to be present to it, because that's all there really is. Now, this idea, one of the ways I'll explain this sometimes to my students down at the traditional campus is to say, imagine for yourself a situation in which you're driving and you get cut off in traffic. Now you get cut off, and there's probably a inclination you have to honk or swear or flip the person off or get angry. Maybe you get really angry. Maybe you get scared. Maybe you have all these things. But the thing is, all of those reactions have to do with something that is no longer there. When you've been cut off in traffic, a car came close to you, you perceived it being close to you, and then it moved on, and that's all it was. There is no reason to react one way or the other, simply to look at it for what it is. Being able to look at something just for what it is and not having your mind leap anywhere else, this is mindfulness. This is what you try to cultivate in all these things of right speech, right practice, right endeavor, all these things. And this is something that is especially exercised by meditation. These two things, mindfulness, meditation, central themes in Theravada Buddhism, because it is these central themes that help us deal with the problems of the first three noble truths, right? Of all life is suffering, suffering comes from craving. In order to extinguish suffering, one must extinguish craving. All right, in the next podcast, I'll begin to move on to the ideal of the saint and who ought I to look towards for inspiration in all this.